Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. Nice to have you with us today. Today I'm going to do an essay. I'm going to address what many in this audience, worldwide, say is the gross decline in our society and quality of life. And so much fear abounds where it used to not be the case. Now, if you go to GaryNull.com, you'll see a list of all the things I've done in my life and third-party documentation for it. I'm not saying this, but others are. For example, my original white papers, where I take on an important topic like, I'll give you an example, our insurance, health insurance. And I say, well, one group in the United States wants private insurance, and another group wants, universal insurance. What is the best? And then I'll do a whole examination of the topic, and then I'll write solutions. And indeed, I sent every member of Congress and other journalists the solution where we could save $1.7 trillion a year and have the best health care in the world. Right now, of the developed nations, about 40, we're dead last. We're last in so many things where we should be first. And the question is why? And then I showed the lack of fairness, the profiteering, the price gouging, the fact we have no programs for preventing disease, and we come in at the end of a disease process and give more medications, medical applications, instead of trying some natural, less toxic approaches. But those are not patented. So all this is in a white paper. That's just one of over 50 white papers I've done. Plus I do original in-depth investigative reports, and then I do ways we can prevent illness, natural approaches preventing heart disease. But also, I do the type of essay I'm going to share now, where I take an issue that impacts everyone, and today the title is, Are We a Society in Decline? It depends upon your ideology, who you ask. Because there are people who are thinking our society is just great. It's never been this great. We have more technology with artificial intelligence and robotics, automation, transhumanism is on the way. The rich are getting richer. They have more planes and mansions. They have more red carpet events. They can wear designer clothes. They eat at the most expensive restaurants. They're doing just fine. And there's more of them than ever before. But what used to be a very vital and solid working middle class, and even working upper middle class, your professional class, they weren't millionaires, most of them, but they're well-to-do, and they had a good standard of living. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, professors, scientists, CPAs. And there are millions of those, all told about 16 million in the professional class. Then you have your entrepreneurs, the people who start off maybe with a small business, and now it's a substantial business. They can afford to live in a gated community for part of the year and go back home the other part, the winter birds. But what about the vast majority of just regular working class people? The people who are the electricians, the mechanics, the glaziers and the roofers, the tilers, the plumbers. What about them? Well, they're not doing so well. And what about the people that spent their life working in a factory? They're doing even worse. Well, what about artificial intelligence? Isn't it supposed to be saving jobs and making new jobs? Nice promise, but not true. White-collar workers who've had steady incomes and some quality of life, they're going to be hit hard. They are being hit hard. College students are graduating now without the opportunity to have a good quality job indefinitely. By the time they graduate, if they haven't already, that job that they were promised, that they studied hard for, it won't be there. Artificial intelligence is unique in that we put so much emphasis and so much promise into developing it of what it would do for society. Less work for all of us, but more opportunity, better quality of life. And it's just the opposite. Massive layoffs with no job in sight. When I graduated from college, there'd be 3 jobs waiting for me and everyone else. Today, there's probably 3,000 people who would apply for a job that you once had. And you're at the beginning of your working career. So yes, we have problems, but it's not all or nothing. And that's why I want to take you on a little journey. I like to combine history, psychology, philosophy, humanistic philosophy, and even poetry. I'm going to begin this with something I said in a recent lecture. A society is not destroyed by the wicked. It is destroyed when the good citizens choose to remain silent, and hence our silent majority. But it's finding its voice, and that's a good thing. Because there comes a moment in the life of a great city when you realize that what has changed is not merely its skyline, its fashions, or its rhythms, but its spirit. I've lived in New York City since June 5th, 1965, when I arrived with $12 on a Greyhound bus. That $12 was gone when I went into the restroom to shave and brush my teeth from a long bus trip, put on my jacket, and there was nothing in it. I slept my first night in New York City on a bench at Central Park, across from the Plaza Hotel. I had to sleep sitting up because when the police come by, they don't allow you to have your feet up on a bench. And the next morning I decided, well, should I stay here? I know no one, I have no friends, and it's a big city. I come from a small city, Parkersburg in West Virginia. And or do I say, okay, I'm at the beginning of a learning curve, and where everyone has to start in life, mine is just here. I chose the next morning to stay, and I'm so grateful that I did. Because had I gone back to Parkersburg, West Virginia, I'd have probably worked in the Ames shovel factory where a couple of my uncles were supervisors, putting handles on shovels for the rest of my life, where everything would be predictable. But up until that moment of graduation, we were led to believe, all of us, that we all had the same opportunities, we would all be able to succeed if we chose to, we had responsibilities that we had to adhere to, our character developed was important to that, and that we would fit in, and that would be the rest of our life. And I thought about that, and I wondered why my mother and father both, for the first time and only time in my life, set me down on graduation night when I came in and said, Gary, now you will begin to see the truth that you've not been aware of. And I said, what's that? You should go to New York City. Why would I want to go to New York City? No one goes to New York City. They might go to Columbus or Pittsburgh. Those are big cities. Because we don't want you having the unique gift you have of being able to come up with solutions to everything that nobody understands. And but there'll be people more open to that kind of mindset, because you're going to meet other people who, like yourself, don't fit in anymore. You could fit in, but look at your aunts and uncles. Look at us. We all fit in. But your father had unique ideas. He's not been able to use them here. So you adapt to the environment you're in and the people around you, and you put a smile on your face no matter what you're feeling, and you coexist. I didn't understand that. I was not terribly bright. I was just an average, maybe even below average person in many ways. But what set me apart from all the other people that I grew up with was that I was always look at something and I wouldn't focus on the problem. I'd focus on what could be done to solve that problem. And I had over 150 inventions before I was 14 years old. People just, and you couldn't talk about anything because you go, what are you talking about, Gary? Well, what if we did this and what if that? And the automatic fish feeder, the highway flashing safety sign around curves, took that state road commission. Thank goodness I kept all those rejection letters where people just didn't think that any of this was practical. It later turned out almost all my inventions were used. I just wasn't paid for it. I wrote a book on it, my first book. But then here I am in New York City. I took my parents' advice. And it was just wonderful. I found the people interesting and unique, very different than people I grew up with. People I grew up with were very passive-aggressive. They'd smile to your face and cut you behind your back. Here, people would cut you to your face. Yeah, New Yorkers are great for telling you, don't ask them what they think, because they're going to tell you no matter what, and you might not like the answer. But I like that. I like people who are honest about things, right or wrong. So when I got here on June 5th, 1965, in those early years, and for decades afterwards, I would walk down Broadway in the evening after I finished my counseling work, my broadcast, when I'd finished my work as a senior research fellow and director of the Anti-Aging Division of the Institute of Applied Biology, a very prestigious research institution. When I had finished my teaching, which is almost every night, in the daytime I teach at like the New School or Pratt Institute, but in the evening I do lectures. And so my schedule was packed. And my office was for almost 30 years, was at 83rd and Broadway in an old 100-year-old building, wonderful architecture. And I'd be tired and I'd get up and I'd stretch and I'd walk down to Lincoln Center, which was just a little over a mile away. And sometimes I would see just breathing in the city, listening to its rhythms. And I would take in a symphony, maybe, if it was not too late. I also went earlier to get a ballet in, and there was film festivals and art festivals there. Lincoln Cinema, 6 movie theaters, small. But you'd see the people who really like quality films would go there. And the people on the street, they were packed. Broadway was packed at night, and no matter what the weather. And those were heady days. I've walked that path hundreds upon hundreds of times, watching generations of New Yorkers flow through the same corridors of culture, each contributing their own energy to this magnificent mosaic. There was a gentleman who just passed very recently, in fact, the last several months, and named Saul Zabar. Zabar's is probably one of the most known unique food stores in American history. It started back in the 1930s by Saul's parents, and Saul and Eli, his brother, have run it for decades. And Saul's a friend of mine and has been for a long time. And we would frequently walk down Broadway and he would point out every single store and he would remember the people's names. Well, we had a shoe store there and the dress store and there was always a kind of a nod and a hi where you were part of a community and the streets were clean, it was safe. The Upper West Side had the greatest amount of educated people, successful people, professional people in the world. From 57th and Broadway to up past Columbia University and Teachers College and Barnard at 120th Street, from the Riverside, the Hudson River, to Central Park, that was the greatest concentration of success in the world. And that was where I grew up. I've witnessed a different New York rising now. Not the New York of resilience, artistry, and communal pulse, but a New York hollowed out by something deeper than economic hardships or shifting political tides. It is a New York marked by disconnection. What do I mean? In the past several months, walking the same stretch of Broadway, I encountered an image that has stayed lodged in my mind. A man clearly in the grip of a profound mental crisis, swinging at about a 6-foot steel pole at passing pedestrians and smashing car windows, one after the other, just boom, walking right down the street, with some form of mechanical despair. What unsettled me, though, was not merely the violence New York has always known its share of turbulence, but the reaction of those walking by. Heads down, eyes fixed on phones, they simply walked around him as if he were a street fixture or a pothole. No shock, no alarm, no instinct to protect or to intervene, as though this were normal. And in today's New York, tragically, it is, everywhere. On those same walks, I passed block after block of shuttered storefronts. Perhaps 20% or more were dark and empty. Spaces that once held delis and shoe repair shops and boutiques and bakeries, the small hum of human livelihood. A city's vitality is measured not by its skyscrapers, but by its street-level soul. And that soul is flickering. Inside a chain drugstore, every item, from toothpaste to deodorant to baby formula, sat locked behind plastic barriers. When I asked the manager said without hesitation, yeah, because gangs come in and steal thousands of dollars worth of products. They walk right out the front door. We can't stop them. We're not allowed to. I asked, how often does this happen? 5 to 10 times a day, she responded. I thought back to my own early years in New York when I ran a small health food store on 108th and Broadway. I had no employees, couldn't afford them. It took me a year to have a day where I did $100 in sales, an entire year. It was a lot of sacrifice, a lot of struggle, but that was back then in the 1967. Over the decades of operation, including my later Uptown Whole Foods store at 89th and Broadway, I could count the number of shoplifting incidents in a year on one hand. Even during COVID, I didn't see that kind of shoplifting. It wasn't that I enforced draconian security, I didn't. It was that people did not want to steal. It violated their community values, their inner compass, their sense of belonging to a shared moral world. Something fundamental has shifted, not only in policy, but in the psyche of the city. I walk through Central Park now and I see gross neglect, debris everywhere, clusters of people suffering without aid. Washington Square Park is also a problem. Once a playground of artists, musicians, lovers, philosophers, and every Sunday I would walk from the Upper West Side where I lived at 86th and Broadway down to Washington Square Park and then enjoyed the park, enjoyed its music, its musicians, its ventriloquists, its artists, and then I'd go to other places to see the great museums. It was a cultural hub. Now it often looks like an open-air ward of untreated anguish. Along Broadway, filth gathers where hope once gathered, and yet passerbys continue without paying attention, as if they've just accepted it, adapted to it. And unfortunately, this is a part of the new urban aesthetic. The normalization of suffering is one of the most dangerous cultural shifts a society can endure. This decline is not the doing of the average New Yorker. No, they're decent human beings, struggling to survive. But the average worker, the people that were there when I lived in New York nonstop, those are not the people today. They have to live elsewhere because it's too expensive to live there, unmitigated greed by the landlords. Most citizens remain moral, ethical, hardworking, and generous, but they are governed by leaders who have confused permissiveness with compassion. The current mayor believes it's acceptable, even beneficial, to allow encampments of human despair to spread across public spaces. We saw the results of that in San Francisco, then in Los Angeles, then in Atlanta, then in Baltimore, in Washington, D.C., and other cities. Crimes once considered misdemeanors worthy of citation or possibly arrest are now treated as inconveniences unworthy of response. A silent message spreads. You may break the rules, there'll be no consequence. And when the guardians retreat, the predators arrive. And have they arrived? I broadcast on this program 5 to 6 years ago that there were 29,000 separate gangs in the United States, and they were increasing. They were increasing in direct proportion to what was allowed as a way of breaking a rule, a crime, a code of conduct. And the consequences for breaking those were shrinking down to nothing, where a smash and grab would be considered too much of an inconvenience for the police to even show up. People just kind of tolerated it, where streets were littered. And I walk down those streets on many of my tours in cities where I go in for a day or two and to do a lecture, and I would see hypodermic needles. I would see human feces and everywhere. And yet it was so abundant. But then I would see the crime, where there were places that were no-go. Don't go there, Gary. In the daytime, you can get there safely, but at nighttime, the gangs. Today, as of this morning, there are 33,000 different gangs, and they only count the members that they've arrested, which is over 1 million. So how many gang members have they not arrested? 5, 10 million? That's a pretty large number of people. And where are they primarily using their knowledge and skills to deprive people of freedom, safety, their own lives? In major cities, where the body politic, the ideology, says it's okay. You can come here, you can steal, you can open up a big warehouse in Brooklyn from items that our gang members have stolen, and because they couldn't be stopped. And now we can sell every item for 30% of its original price. It's even so bad we can steal from a person, walk out on the street from their store, set up tables, and the entire blocks in Queen are made up of tables of stolen merchandise. So people that used to walk down those blocks and not see this stolen debris now just kind of shrug their shoulders, look down, and walk on. Or they might stop and buy something they knew was stolen out of the store. Whole street of women out there, and almost all of them belonging under the control of gangs and cartels, where if they don't abide by the rules, then their family members will be harmed or killed. And yet, it's thriving. Drugs are thriving. And quality of life in those areas are depreciating. So yes, we have problems. Yes, we have decline. We have the breaking down of law and order. We have breaking down of consequences, but not everywhere. Because here's what you haven't been told. And these are the actual statistics. I just verified them. That almost all of your terrible crime, 47% of your serious crimes, are committed by gangs. Well, look at it from my perspective. Someone gets set on fire, a woman, true story, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, on a subway. You don't just die instantly. It might take you 10 to 15 minutes to finally be burned to death. All the while, a person's trying to ask for help and no one's helping the person. No one's throwing a coat over them. No one's calling the police. No one's doing anything, but they are stopping and filming it. Wow. The very next day, a woman's stabbed in the throat and she's bleeding out. No one's helping. But here you have to put it in perspective. One person setting someone on fire, one person stabbing a person is bad enough. But what about the 3.3 million people who use the subway system in New York each day? The 1.2 million people use the buses each day. So when you put it in perspective of how many people are not committing crimes and wouldn't think of it, versus the ones that never do well who do, the gang members who do, then you have to look at where the problem really rests. It's not universal. It's not that everyone is finding a way to exploit a situation. When I find a wallet, because of the conditioning I had as a child, the good conditioning, the insights, that doesn't belong to you, does it? No. Then why don't you find the person that does? I remember once coming home for dinner, and coming up the alley behind my house, I saw a baseball mitt. So I picked it up, looked around, didn't see one. So, all right, took it home, and my mom saw it, said, "Where'd you find that?" I said, "Out in the alley." "Do you think someone just left it there on purpose for you to find, or do you think someone forgot it?" "They forgot it." "Well, why don't you go now, get up from the table, and go and knock on every door, because it's probably going to be within a short distance of there." And she was right. And one of my neighbors, it was there, and they thanked me for it. My mom reminded me that even when something is gotten, if it's gotten at someone else's expense, don't take it. You shouldn't gain by someone else's loss. That was stuck in my mind. And I'm sure it's stuck in your mind as well. So if you found a wallet, you'd look at the address, you look at the person's name, and you'd reach out to them and say, I found your wallet. And you would also make sure that whatever money was in there is given to them. The never-do-wells, they don't have to wait for someone's, they'll drive by on mopeds and put a gun in your face and take your wristwatch, take your purse. They go out of their way each day to put fear into people's hearts because they're predators, they're armed, they're dangerous, and they're in packs. And in those cities that have had young people more often than not who are in control of city councils, mayor's office, and those who are purely political predators, such as district attorneys and attorney generals and governors. These are the people who allow this to happen because they could stop it. But they choose not to, so we have to keep everything in perspective. Remember this. Here is the silent message that is accepted by most people. You may break the rules, there'll be no consequence. So come to our city to do it. And when the guardians retreat, the predators arrive. New York's not alone. Cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah, big cities, small cities show the same cracks. In a nation with more than 33,000 known gangs and at least 1 million documented gang members, the question becomes, how many operate unseen, uncounted, unrestrained? When a city signals that no longer enforces the boundaries that protect the innocent, to protect the normal citizen, those boundaries are quickly tested and breached. And that won't change. It'll get worse. And so we see random acts of violence that seize headlines. A person set on fire, as I just mentioned, in the subway, and passengers film instead of helping. That woman I mentioned stabbed in the neck in Grand Central Station as onlookers just step aside. Nobody helps her, nobody calls. They become unwilling even to call for assistance. A young Ukrainian woman murdered on a train in South Carolina by a repeat offender, over 40 arrests, and yet they kept letting him out. Well, doesn't the judge hold responsibility for that as well? Yes, that judge and district attorney should. And astonishingly, activists crowdfunded a defense for the perpetrator while they didn't even remember the name of the victim. That's ideology run amok. This is what happens when ideology replaces empathy, when compassion is confused with chaos, when leaders refuse to enforce consequences because they mistake moral clarity for cruelty. It is important to say this clearly. The average person is not in decline. The average American remains anchored in decency, values, and conscience. What is in decline is the body politic, the leadership, the policies, the ideological frameworks that reward dysfunction and punish responsibility. What is in gross decline and virtually unrepairable is an entire political ideology that says we will do anything to buy a vote, to get guaranteed of re-election so we can maintain power indefinitely. And the city is filled by the tens of thousands of lobbyists and consultants that have control over the body politic. And this local cities around the United States also have contractors, NGOs, who are behind the scenes, pilfering the public purse and getting away with it. I just looked up on the internet just now, before I started this commentary. How much does a bus ticket cost from San Antonio, Texas, where the border is, where the undocumented immigrants come across, to get that person on a bus and take him to New York City? Well, the lowest price I could find is $185. The highest was $265. Then why were we, the people, charged $6,000 per person for 49 people to be on a bus? And then they were given what should have been $75 a PCR test, $2,000. So right away, someone's making $8,000 per person, and it should have been $200. That's how corrupt it is. NGOs are everywhere. They're a blight upon society, and yet they control every aspect of our lives. We're just not aware of it. And so ordinary people, bewildered and exhausted, vote with their feet. Retirees migrate to communities down in Florida, where I live now with my animal sanctuary. Naples, Fort Myers, Bonita Springs. Searching for peace, civility, cleanliness, and predictability. They seek places where the moral contract still holds. Respect given, respect returned. Meanwhile, many younger people, deprived of mentorship and moral training, swim in a culture that tells them discomfort is oppression. Effort is optional. Excellence is elitist. They learn to label mathematics as racist rather than to learn its disciplines. Ask the average person. Ask the average senior in high school and the freshman in college. Here's a simple calculus, trigonometry, algebra problem. It's simple. Solve it. 99% would not be able to. They dismiss English literature as cultural imposition rather than explore its humanity. If you want an Italian restaurant dish or a French dish or Mexican dish, you can't do that with a clear conscience because that's cultural appropriation. They mistake collective guilt for personal identity. They confuse feelings with facts and absorb ideologies that frame victimhood as a virtue and pride themselves and gang around other people who are also victims. Why? Because we no longer teach them otherwise. Historically, every culture relied on elders, the wisdom bearers, to guide young people into maturity, to help them in transitions. Today, the bridge is broken. Youth rejects guidance as control. Adults retreat from mentorship out of fear. Institutions bow to ideological fads rather than timeless truths. And in the absence of moral instruction, nihilism rushes in. This is the root of our crisis. Not crime alone, not homelessness alone, not mental illness alone, not gangs alone or failing leadership alone, but the collapse of shared meaning, the spiritual glue that once held communities together. This exploration is not a lament, it's a call to restore accountability, a call to rekindle dignity, a call to remember the common good. Only when we reclaim responsibility at every level, personal, civic, cultural, and spiritual, can we begin to be what we once were. This is a call for renewal. But we've gone through a long descent. How have we lost our moral compass? Moral decline rarely arrives like an earthquake. Instead, it unfolds like a series of slight shifts, barely perceptible at first, accumulating until the ground beneath our feet feels unfamiliar. Our present crisis is the culmination of decades of cultural drift, a weakening not of laws, but of the invisible bones of society, responsibility, duty, gratitude, and service. In came the 1960s, when we were young and idealistic and foolish and not very wise. But we engaged in revolution, but we forgot the power of reconstruction. The 60s were a turning point in American consciousness, a time of immense courage, creativity, and righteous dissent. People marched, sang, and spoke truth to entrench power. They demanded equality, dignity, and representation, and the nation slowly and painfully began to change. But beneath the victories ran a powerful secondary message. All authority is suspect. Don't trust the man. Structure equals oppression. We want more anarchy. Tradition is a cage to be escaped. Our parents and our grandparents, aunts and uncles would listen to us and shake their heads. We thought they were backward. They were part of history, but not the moment. But not all movements intended this. But cultural ideas, once released, have a way of spreading far beyond their original aim and morphing into something else. Suddenly, the teacher who demanded discipline in class was seen as repressive. The parent who maintained boundaries was accused of Authoritarianism. Doors were slammed. I hate you. I wish you were dead. Slammed. An hour later, I need a credit card to go to the mall. As if words that were politicized and weaponized made no difference. The police officer was presumed guilty by default. Don't trust a cop. Anyone in a position of responsibility became a symbol of the system. It is true that many authorities abused their power, and genuine reform was urgently needed. But the total rejection of structure left a spiritual vacuum. Young people were liberated from old constraints, but now they were not guided towards new principles. Rules were undone faster than meaning could be built. Rebellion is powerful, but rebellion without reconstruction breeds confusion. And then came this sense of unanchored individualism. I'll do what I want to do, Gary, because, well, I'm free to do it. I'm not a part of the system. Yes, you are. Every single thing in your life is part of the system. You haven't created anything on your own except an attitude from hell. Good luck with that. Then came the 1980s, prosperity without purpose. A decade that shimmered with promise on the surface, even as it hollowed out the inner life beneath. It was the era of the deal maker, the designer suit, the corporate ladder, climbing up it, stepping over others in the process. The culture declared wealth as a new deity. Movies like Wall Street taught a generation that greed is good, and Americans, many, believed it, or at least tolerated it. Billboards celebrated luxury. Commercials glamorized excess. Debt bloomed like a new national flower. Success was no longer measured by contribution, but by accumulation, and by showing the world you were better, you were different, and therefore you were more unique. This shift reshaped the emotional DNA of the country. A person's worth became tied to market value. The dignity of honest labor faded. The janitor, the school teacher, the social worker, the plumber, the electrician, people who knitted society together, were increasingly overlooked in favor of entrepreneurs and celebrities. A society that worships possession cannot convincingly preach restraint. And when adults chase status symbols, children observe carefully and conclude that taking is more admired than earning. Thus began the quiet normalization of entitlement. The 2000s to 2020s, that was the digital fragmentation and the collapse of shared reality. A new millennium arrived with glowing screens, global connectivity, and intoxicating promises of instant access to everything. You didn't have to study. Scholarship, forget about it. No, you could hire someone to do everything for you. A thesis sitting in a class instead of you being in the class. Cheated everything. On or nothing. But it felt revolutionary. It felt empowering. Yet beneath the excitement, a more subtle transformation was occurring. Young people entered a world where identity became a performance. Childhood, once filled with tactile experiences, dirt under the fingernails, playing kickball, bicycle riding until sunset, face-to-face friendships, that was replaced by curated digital personas and constant comparisons. Algorithms became the new teachers. Pixels became the new parents. Endless stimuli replaced reflection. Consider what this does to the developing mind. Focus becomes fractured. Empathy becomes diffused. Morality becomes situational. Well, I'll be moral sometimes, but not all the time. I'll select what I want to be truthful about. And my reality, that's optional. I find delusion much more exciting, don't you? Violence and cruelty, once hidden on the margins of society, now spread virally within seconds, normalized by repetition. And a child with a smartphone can witness more brutal acts by the age of 15 than an entire generation saw in their lifetime. And we, the adults, call this connection. No. We handed children the world's chaos and told them they were empowered. But empowerment without emotional guidance is abandonment in disguise. We gave them tools of communication. It failed to teach them the discipline of listening. Everyone talks over everyone. Everyone screams. Everyone yells. Everyone curses. The ethics of speaking, gone. The value of reflection, missing entirely. The result? Today, a generation drifting, sometimes brilliant, some creative, some passionate, yet overall, the vast majority of young people today, isolated and increasingly unsure of what is true. So that bred a whole new normalization of crime. There's a strange moment in the life of a society when the unacceptable becomes ordinary, not through conscious agreement, but through quiet exhaustion, a gradual shifting of thresholds, a subtle lowering of the collective gaze. Don't look up and see the problem and do something about it. Look down, disconnect, become a part of the growing silent majority. Crime did not suddenly become normal. It became normal incrementally through a series of cultural concessions, each seemingly small, each defended as compassionate or pragmatic, until people looked up one day and realized that what once shocked them was now not even creating a response. Nothing stirred. We are living in such a moment now. Shoplifting, once a furtive act committed in embarrassment, is now performed with casual boldness. Vandalism is framed as expression. We're going in there, we're going to destroy that store, we're going to take everything as a value because, well, it's our way of expressing what we believe is our entitlement to reparations. Yeah? Assaults are filmed, not prevented. There was a time when I would go out to Coney Island Beach. Couldn't afford to go anywhere else. And my friends, who were all either writers who were poor or artists who were very poor, it would be our fun day to go out on a weekend. The beach was clean. There was no fighting. It was fun to see all the different people. Now, Coney Island has about 32,000 residents in it. And yet, starting about 6 months ago, 1,000 people, teenagers, would leave class on Friday to go out there to fight and trash. It looks like a ghetto, and it's not safe. But the 32,000 normal residents are not the problem, nor are they participating in it. They look out the windows and think, that used to be a place for generation after generation you could go and enjoy yourself with your family and friends. Graffiti spreads across public spaces like a rash that no one feels responsible to treat. I was walking down Amsterdam Avenue on my last visit to the city a few months ago. There was garbage piled up the entire way that I walked, clear down to where Lincoln Center is, but clear back up to 96th Street. And yet every restaurant, outdoor restaurant, was filled. People enjoying each other's company and the meal. The place smelled. There was just, nothing had been kept up. Nothing had been cleaned. Here, when I go down to Fifth Avenue, every single building is beautiful. The streets are clean. There's giant baskets of flowers hanging. There's music played on different blocks. There's no crime. No. And you can have a conversation with anyone. The farmers market's the most creative farmers market in America, dwarfing anything out of New York City. Yeah. I mean, people were, I don't know where they came from in their former life. Maybe they got unemployed. But they have beautiful carts. There's one in particular. It looks like a French bistro. The painting, the creation of it. And here's all these French pastries displayed. And then some seats so you can have a pastry and sit and have this. And the woman, I asked her, I said, this is really beautiful what you've done. She said, well, we all have to make a living, and I lost my last job as a financial consultant. So I decided to do this. I had just enough money to build this. But now it's flourishing, and it's fun, and everybody appreciates it. And there were some guys who got those drums, the steel drums, and one had saffron rice, with chicken. They were meat-based, but It was how they did it. And $10 for a small cup and $20 for a large bowl. A line must have been 100 people in there. So I asked the guy, I said, this is really neat what you've done. He said, yeah. I said, how many of these do you sell? He said, maybe 300 on a Saturday. Well, that's about $4,000 to $6,000. Every single one of these was something unique and really interesting to look at on a street that is beautiful, where you don't have any graffiti, you don't have any debris. And the architecture, they will not allow any building that disrupts the natural Mediterranean look. So you have all these like orange clay tile roofs and stuccos and beautiful artwork. Yeah. And ask people, why would you stay living in a place that is unsafe, where you fear going from your home to a store on the corner or to a bank to deposit or withdraw money? So that is what's happening. These small communities are flourishing where the major metropolitan areas, yeah, if you're rich, you can stay safe, you can hire security, you live in the areas less likely to be affected. But that's not America. So what is happening now is there's a slow cultural numbness that has taken hold. I'm not hyperbolizing. It is lived experience for millions, tens of millions of Americans. So then we go through this whole crazy, immature concept of really foolish people saying, decriminalize, and I say, you mean without discernment? Beginning around 2014, a wave of policy shifts swept through major cities. Penalties for theft, trespassing, vandalism, fighting, stealing, and drug possession were reduced or eliminated altogether. The argument was a moral one. We must not criminalize poverty or addiction. I agree. But what are you doing to reverse poverty or addiction? You keep taking jobs from people, then they can't pay their mortgage payments, they can't pay their car payments, they can't pay their credit card payments, and one day they find themselves homeless. The majority of people who are homeless are not drug addicts or alcoholics. The vast majority are just people where the society that they trusted no longer provided them with an opportunity to earn an honest living. That story we refuse to look at. But I've shared that with this audience. I've shared you where there are RV parks where people have lived for decades, where they pay a small rent, but they have a community swimming pool, they have their own generally double-wide RVs, and they live off small, payments of Social Security or retirement funds. And now equity partners are coming in and buying up the park and then raising the prices sky high. It's all about their profit. But what about the people who have no place to move? And I must move, or they'll be their RV will be taken away from them. So people are living in their cars now. And who cares? Clearly not the politicians. So separate out criminalizing poverty and addiction, which shouldn't be. You should be helping people, but the right way. And the intention in its earliest form was humane. Today, it is criminal, the treatment. But compassion without discernment becomes a kind of societal negligence. When minor crimes are dismissed, they do not evaporate, they multiply. You've got 33,000 separate gangs with millions and millions of members, and they're not going to go where they're still enforcing the law, where you can't trespass on someone's property. You can't go up and with a gun and knock on the door, and then when the person comes to the door, tie him up and go through their house and steal. No. There are places you do that, you'll pay a serious consequence. But what about all the places say, no, they probably weren't breastfed long enough, so now they're a rapist, a criminal. It's disgusting. When consequences disappear, boundaries dissolve. You don't have to be a genius to figure this out. And we have entire city councils and mayors by the gazillions who simply cannot understand this. These are people who are extremely intellectually immature and spiritually devoid. And yet you vote those people into office, that's on you. In cities like Los Angeles, thefts under $950 were effectively deprioritized. Word spread quickly, not though conspiracies, but through observation. People committed theft in broad daylight, calmly sweeping shelves into bags as bewildered employees and owners looked on, forbidden by corporate policy or local politics from intervening. Police, knowing the cases would not be pursued, rarely responded. In San Francisco, Walgreens, CVS's, Target's locations closed, not because of any other reason, but because the cost of repeated mass shoplifting exceeded any possible revenue. And it's bad. In New York City, just New York City alone, shoplifting in 1 year brought in $4.2 billion. Now that's a net profit. So compare that to how many corporations made more than $4 billion in just one city in 1 year. So stealing is a very successful business. Videos of mass groups rushing into stores with trash bags became so commonplace that they generated their own genre of social media. This is not a failure of policing alone. It's a failure of moral clarity. Decriminalization, when applied without nuance, does not protect the vulnerable. It destabilizes the very communities it claims to help, but nobody pulls back, gets rid of all of the identity politics and the people claiming to be doing something for the public's good. Wow. This is called the psychology of permission. Human behavior does not exist in a vacuum. When society signals through policy, media, or silence that consequences no longer accompany wrongdoing, something shifts inside the human psyche. People begin to reinterpret the rules. They begin to test boundaries. They begin to believe that transgression is not merely tolerated, but justified. For young people already swimming in emotional turbulence, a lack of intellectual capacity, no sense of wisdom, in effect, immature brats, the effect is profound, and many of them are, growing up in a fractured family system, but not getting help, struggling academically with little individualized support, inundated with social media conditioning that glorifies narcissism and impulsivity, burdened by chronic stress and untreated mental health issues, pessimistic about their economic futures. When the moral architecture around them crumbles, crime is no longer seen as a moral violation. It becomes a coping mechanism, a performance, a rite of passage, even an identity. 20 teenagers rampaging in Los Angeles sees a person coming down the street and beats him almost to death. And for them, that was fun. Since when did that become something acceptable? But it is. In such an atmosphere, wrongdoing becomes less about survival and more about belonging. The group that stills together becomes a surrogate community. The video that goes viral becomes validation. The absence of consequences become a warped version of empowerment. This is the psychology of permission, and it's one of the great spiritual crises of our times. When the protectors step back, the consequences of defund the police are exposed. An honest exploration of accountability can ignore the culture earthquake triggered by the defund the police movement, the impulse that it initiated it, anger at unjust violence, grief over lost lives. A demand for reform was absolutely valid. America has long harbored a painful history of policing failures, and calls for justice were not only appropriate, but necessary. But as often happens in moments of raw emotion, the movement's moral energy was captured by a simplistic slogan, less policing equals more justice. Slogans, however, emotionally stirring, are not policies. They are not strategies. They are not solutions. The results, measured over the next several years, were devastating, particularly for the very communities the movement claimed to champion. In fact, cities saw historic spikes in violent crime. Between 2020 and 2022, major U.S. cities saw an unprecedented rise in violent crime. Murder surged 30%, the largest one-year increase in modern American history. Cities like Chicago, Portland, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, and New York experienced dramatic spikes in shootings, robberies, carjackings. Retail theft rose tremendously, and the outcomes were not mysterious. they correlated directly with cuts in police budgets, reduced patrols, firing freezes, officer resignations, weakened prosecution, ideological preference to, quote, restorative justice, which is a joke. I was once asked by the city if I would go in and be one of the counselors for people coming out of the Queen's House of Detention. They'd served their time, they were coming out, and so I went there. I worked with them. I did the same thing working in the Newark prison system. So I have a lot of experience working with people coming out of a system to try to get them to understand the lessons learned, as painful as they were, so they don't commit another crime and go back in. Why can't we use models from around the world where people actually learn about their crimes, the nature of the crime, so they don't commit them again, and they're successful? We don't. It's about punishment, and that doesn't solve the problem. Just remember, when the guardians retreat, the predators advance. Police retirements and resignations hit record levels. Most officers did not join law enforcement seeking power or domination. Many entered the profession because they feel a call of duty to protect their communities. But when an entire national narrative tells them that they are villains, when city leaders use them as political scapegoats, and when their split-second actions are judged in emotionally charged media trials, something inside them breaks. And so they leave. And when they leave, crime rises. And when crime rises, those who suffer most are not activists tweeting from affluent suburbs or protected environments, but working-class families in urban neighborhoods who depend upon the police presence not as ideology, but as survival. This is not theoretical. It is reality documented by criminologists, sociologists, and community surveys. The consequences of weakening policing reach far beyond statistics. They are etched into the daily lives of ordinary people. Small businesses, many owned by immigrant or minorities, closed after repeated break-ins. Elders become afraid to walk down a street. Children walking to school navigated neighborhoods filled with violence, open-air drug use, and adults in emotional crisis. Nighttime, forget about it. Once simply part of the day's rhythm, become a border that people feared to cross. The tragedy is unmistakable. When law enforcement is weakened, the rich remain safe. The influential remain insulated. But everyone else, you're vulnerable because you've been abandoned. You're not important enough. The promise of reform becomes the reality of neglect. The economics of disorder, how crime devours livelihoods. Crime is often spoken of in moral or political terms, but rarely do we acknowledge its deeper, more devastating truth. Crime is an economic force, a silent siphoning, draining the livelihoods and the lifeblood of communities. It does not simply occur in isolated moments. It ripples outward, altering the financial and emotional landscape of entire neighborhoods. Every theft, even seemingly trivial acts of slipping a product into a pocket, reverberates far beyond the moment it occurs. Prices inch upwards, security costs multiply, shelves are rearranged behind locked panels, public trust thins. This is the hidden tax paid by the honest. Those who play by the rules must increasingly bear the weight of those who do not. A shattered storefront does not just injure glass, it injures possibility. A vandalized park bench is not merely damaged wood. It is a message to children that beauty has no guardian. A stolen delivery truck is not just lost merchandise. It is a week of wages for a driver struggling to keep food on the table. And how many times have we seen a whole new phenomenon we never saw, never in decades growing up in America? You have a delivery at your house and suddenly cars are coming up, parking, running up and stealing your delivery. Wow. In 2023, American retailers reported more than $112 billion in losses due to organized theft and shrinkage. That would make organized crime more profitable that year from what it stole and then resold than almost any other corporation in its sales. Right at the top, a number so staggering it becomes almost abstract until you translate that into human cost. Fewer jobs, higher prices, shorter hours, shuttered doors, dimmed lights, lives changed. This is not random chaos, but a kind of economic cancer, slow growing, metastasizing, feeding on the good faith of ordinary people. Small businesses cannot absorb the impact. When a large corporation closes a store due to repeated theft or escalating crime, executives issue statements, adjust spreadsheets, move to a safer location. They feel the loss, but they can survive it. When a small business closes, a life closes. A neighborhood deli that has served 3 generations shuts its doors, and suddenly a community loses more than sandwiches. It loses a gathering place, a sense of continuity, a place where names are known, where the elderly are checked on, where a teenager might receive their first lesson in work ethic. Hi, Barbara, want the usual? Barbara says, yeah. The person knows that Barbara's coming, knows what Barbara orders. That's that community. Something simple. A bookstore that closes leaves behind not just empty shelves, but an emptied spirit, a vanished refuge of curiosity and imagination. A dress shop, a barber shop, a corner market, each carries the heartbeat of a neighborhood. And when crime forces these doors shut, something irreplaceable is lost. These businesses do not bounce back. They often disappear permanently, leaving behind only the echo of what once gave a street its character. Crime deters investment. Economists often describe investment as a calculation of risk and return. But human beings invest not only capital, they invest hope, optimism, and belief in the future. And where people do not feel safe, they do not invest. So begins the cycle. Crime rises, businesses leave, jobs disappear, buildings decay, property values fall, and those who can leave do. This accelerates blight, deepens unemployment, cements generational poverty. Safety is not an abstract virtue. It is the ground on which opportunity grows. We must acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. Crime is not merely an economic problem. It is a form of social sabotage. Left unaddressed, it steals not only property, but potential, not only lives, but futures. And so we have to ask, this generational disconnect, is it because of entitlement and despair fueling this? Because beneath the headlines about crime statistics lies a quieter crisis, the unraveling of guidance. We are raising generations fluent in expression and starved for direction, equipped with technology but deprived of wisdom, surrounded by information yet unmoored from meaning. This is not a condemnation of young people. They are not the architects of this moment, but its inheritors. It is the adults who failed to give them the scaffolding needed for moral, emotional, and civic maturity. The absence of accountability in our youth culture is substantial. Many young people today are raised in an ecosystem of instant gratification, infinite entertainment, curated validation, and the soft avoidance of difficulty. Childhood has been reshaped from a period of apprenticeship into a stage of indulgence. Adults fearful of conflict or shaped by new ideological fashions shy away from boundaries that once gave children a sense of safety and identity. When schools lower academic standards, which is happening everywhere, harming self-esteem, they do not protect students. They weaken them. So let's get out of this idea that the only thing that counts is how you feel. How you feel is irrelevant. That does not and should not be an excuse for your self-esteem being lowered. You've been overindulged. It's weakened you. When parents negotiate rather than guide, or seek friendship rather than stewardship, then your children lose the gift of resilience. When society normalizes excuse-making, it quietly normalizes mediocrity. The result is a generation unprepared for struggle, not because they are incapable, but because we have shielded them from the very friction that builds character. And a person who has never wrestled with discipline will struggle to understand accountability. That leads to the rise of learned helplessness. Ask the average person what they can do in any emergency, and the answer is nothing. They'll Google something. At the same time, young adults face challenges unprecedented in scope. Economic uncertainty that weighs on the psyche, social skills weakened by digital mediation, rising depression, anxiety, and identity fragmentation, academic decline so severe that in some districts, fewer than 30% of students read or do math at grade level. Whole schools allowed to graduate with functional illiterates. Without elders who can interpret the world for them, despair often turns inward or erupts outward. Hopelessness becomes rebellion. Rebellion becomes nihilism. And nihilism, left unaddressed, becomes fertile grounds for transgression and violence. It is not that young people do not care about meaning. They do. Many. It is that they're starving for it. Narcissism, social media, and the collapse of empathy are everywhere. We often speak of narcissism as if it were mere vanity, an overabundance of self-love. No. In truth, narcissism is the opposite, a profound emptiness. It is the ache of someone who has not yet found the stable center for which authentic life flows. They have not yet touched, seen, or experienced the pure light of conscious awareness. Social media accelerates this hunger. It rewards performance over substance, outrage over nuance, spectacle over sincerity. A teenager can now perform morally, post it, film it, hashtag it, without ever practicing it. When an entire culture worships visibility instead of virtue, people begin to crave significance without the discipline of inner development. Empathy collapses not because people become cruel, but because they become disconnected. When the screen mediates every human moment, the heart forgets how to recognize another's suffering. This emotional thinning, this erosion of shared feeling is one of the most dangerous trajectories of our time. It creates individuals who no longer sense the consequences of their actions, not because they are evil, but because they have never been taught to listen to the quiet interior voice that says, your life matters, but so does everyone else's. The spiritual dimension must be emphasized. Why crime reflects a soul in crisis. Beneath every social problem lies a spiritual one. And crime, though often measured only in statistics and reported in headlines, is at its essence a spiritual cry. A cry from individuals who no longer recognize their own worth or anyone else's. A cry for communities that have forgotten how to nurture dignity. A cry from a nation that has lost its sense of purpose. Crime is the symptom. Disconnection is the disease. A person does not harm another when they are whole, happy. Harm arises when something precise has gone missing within, when the internal compass has been shattered, when the heart goes numb, when the soul feels exiled from meaning. People steal when they feel unseen. People lash out when they feel unheard. People rationalize wrongdoing when consciousness has been dulled by cynicism, when life has taught them falsely that nothing matters and no one cares. So take what you want. When spirituality is removed from daily life, ethics no longer feel rooted in anything eternal. They become negotiable, flexible, conditional. When meaning dissolves, destruction becomes seductive, a temporary thrill that mimics purpose. And when hope vanishes, crime becomes a kind of currency, an attempt to feel power in a world where one feels powerless. A soul that has forgotten its own value becomes capable of anything, and then it spreads. This is why our crisis cannot be solved with legislation alone. Crime is a spiritual vacuum, and vacuums must be filled. People need purpose more than punishment, connection more than condemnation, belonging more than surveillance. Without renewal at the spiritual soul level, society becomes a landscape of wandering spirits searching for something to replace what has been lost. Thank you very much for watching, and please share this with others.